Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We got something a little different for you here tonight, but right off the bat, Darren, welcome back.
Hey, how's it going, Fred? It's been too long, I guess, but now we're back again, once again. So
The band is back together again, and we've got a third joining us tonight. Would you care to introduce yourself?
No, not really, but I will, because you asked. My name is Emmet Fifield of HOBO Films. I make claymation and, films with the regular-sized people occasionally as well. And I love my old-fashioned effects, which is apparently what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, we were trying to figure out what would be a good topic to discuss with Emmett, and special effects came up. And when we bandied about some titles, for the most part, not surprisingly, the 80s became the main focus. But we're gonna throw a curveball or two. You like stop motion. What drew you specifically to it?
Well, before I started making stop motion, I was already a pretty big fan of sculpting. So sculpting and your cartoons and all that. So just was naturally drawn to that as a combination of the two. Building, sculpting, making miniatures.
Excellent.
what was one of your first things, you started with? Like, what was one of your first sculpts that you did? What was one of the first inspirations you had to make something? Do you remember that experience, the first thing you did, and first couple things you may have done?
Good question. I remember making my own version of a South American tribal mask. It was something I sculpted. It was also had its tongue out and googly eyes. So it's an early art project I remember.
What's the first film that you saw that actually caught your eye because of stop motion that made you go, I'd like to try this?
Mysterious Island from 1960, I believe. Specifically the crab sequence.
That is one of my favorites when I was growing up. I was a big fan of Journey to the Center of the Earth, and I loved 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And I still remember the first time I saw Mysterious Island and being completely blown away that Captain Nemo was in it. So I'm so glad that's one of the films you wanted to talk about. That's a great one. Darren, you're a fan too, weren't you not?
I was envious. I wanted to eat some of that crab with the crew. That would have been great. So that crab looked tasty.
It looked really good. This film makes you hungry. This
Very.
film makes you hungry.
They're about food the whole time. They're like, we're going to get this, we're going to get that. Like, they're obsessed with food, basically, and it's kind of a funny farming thing. What was it? A lot of people were saying it was inspirational for some later films that were to come out or TV series and things like that. It's like this was the beginning of that kind of being trapped on an island kind of concept. So
They never got to have octopus, unfortunately. They were in too much of a hurry.
No. Now, are you familiar with, since you brought up the crab, are you familiar with how they did that? Would you like to go into that?
Yes, they used an actual crab skeleton that Ray Harryhausen fixed with a stop-motion armature.
Which explains why it looks so good. It really does look like a crab, because it is.
Only thing that really gives it away is the kind of the googly eyes on it. You do kind of see it pivot a little bit at some points.
It's living taxidermy.
Yep.
I could see why that, crab is fine as long as they're not doing with kittens and puppies. They're fine.
Living taxidermy like Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Ooh.
I thought the bees were, I think, one of the most amazing looking effects in that movie. Because as a stupid contrast, there's one thing rewatching this that I have to say did not hold up so well. There's a shot of seagulls when you first get to the island, and they just superimposed them, and you could kind of see through them, and it's not the best of effects, but it's an interesting contrast when you get to the bees.
It looks like they were sketched on with colored pencils almost over the top of the cell frame. The compositing was definitely vintage. So
Oh, it was considering the rest of it looks good, because the stuff with the balloon was like a combination of live action against a blue screen, miniatures, traveling mats, real old school traditional stuff. And then you see those seagulls. So I was like, oh man, that's terrible. They're superimposed against the background. Oh, but the bees looked amazing. I really rewatching that sequence. I was amazed by that. And I remember as a kid when it started walling them up in the honeycomb, that became a very unnatural fear of my own. Wait, bees will do that? They'll wall you up? It's like, okay, I didn't need that fear on top of my, sharks are going to grab me from underwater after seeing Jaws.
I wonder too, also with that design, with regards to the bee design and all the traditional animals, they were pretty smart with trying to keep with real, relatable creatures most of the time. You can definitely tell there's a difference when they go to something that's not naturally occurring, with the giant bird chicken thing or the octopus thing, and et cetera, where they're a little more cartoonish and sensationalized, but they had to go that route because it just didn't exist in a real world sense. I think that for me too, coming from never seeing this film until just seeing it now, I'm shocked as a kid I never watched it because I was a huge fan of 20,000 Leagues. It seems like it's intentionally ripping off and trying to be a sequel to that in kind of a way or whatever, even though it's not at all. I think that the effects work like is a kid's dream to grow up with that and watch that. I'm disappointed only just now I'm seeing it. I would have really enjoyed it when I was younger as well. So
Even the design of the submarine, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, well, I saw a little making of. They had to intentionally make the Nautilus look just a little different because they didn't want a lawsuit with Disney. So they wanted it to feel like a continuation of that story, but they had to be careful not to cross too far. So they used the description from the book, obviously, and that way they could stay within the parameters to not get sued by the House of Mouse. So would you consider yourself, Emmett, a big fan of Harryhausen? Because
Oh, yeah.
saw something at the beginning of this I forgot about, that his style is called super dynamation. I forgot about that.
Mainly
And-
for marketing purposes.
Oh, completely for it. It meant nothing. It's just what he called it. It wasn't just dynamation. It was super dynamation.
This is Dynamation.
It got a big smile out of me. I really appreciated that one. But that score by Bernard Herrmann, oh, what a great score.
I just have to say it's a score by Bernard Herrmann.
Yeah. Well, that's something that stood out to me throughout all the films we're going to discuss is the idea of layering and how when it comes to special effects, they have to serve the story. They must serve it. And there are many layers that sell them. And, a good score is part of it. The sound design is part of it. And of course, what they're being used for. The more they're involved with the story, the better they seem. And before we go to a movie I can't wait to talk about, you might say it's my pick for this discussion. Let's go to one you brought up that Darren and I were not familiar with at all. We had to watch it before this recording. I want to know why you picked it and what it is about this film. The movie's called Just Imagine from 1930. What the heck, man?
Well, for one, I thought it'd be a standout to you guys. And kind of just because it's one of those early breakthroughs in miniature effects that just doesn't really get talked about anymore. And it's also just a very fascinating time capsule.
Darren, had you heard of this film before this was brought up?
No, I hadn't, but I've definitely seen clips from it. So that's the one funny part about it is that it's definitely used and referenced in popular culture and definitely things in different places. I've seen parts of it, definitely, or screen grabs or, things like that, but I've never have watched it. To be frank, it's kind of almost as if they were, maybe this is my takeaway from it, they were trying to do anything and everything almost as a demonstration, from the sound to the effects to the visuals to matte paintings to all the weird, it was almost a demonstration of what was possible to sell people's skill sets. To me, the movie itself is a bit play-like, I will for sure, but that makes sense considering where it's from. But the reality is it feels like they were trying to showcase all of the cool things they could do and try to get more, because obviously it felt like, granted, the version that I was able to find wasn't very good. We can discuss that. It's a whole other problem, but I'm curious what the higher quality version would look like. But I feel like they did a lot with probably not as much as they should have had to do what they were trying to do. It was a very ambitious movie for the time.
I saw that it cost $1 million, which at the time was pretty high because that was 1930, and in 9 years later, in 1939, Gone with the Wind was like 3 point something million. So when you go back 9 years, $1 million for this movie was a lot of money, and it's almost nonsensical as a story. It wasn't based off of a famous book, it wasn't an existing property. It just seemed like such an odd choice. I think I described it as if Metropolis was a rom-com.
Yeah, kind of.
That's with musical numbers.
Yeah, I don't really think you'll remember any of the music in the movie.
I clipped through it, I won't lie. I think the first song I listened to, and then when all the others came up, I just kept it forward until I was out of the song. But have you seen this movie a lot? Are you a fan of it?
I've seen it a few times over the years, just more as like a case study than anything. This movie did have the largest miniature set ever built up to that point.
I was reading it was as big as a Zeppelin hangar.
Yep. And the miniatures do look great.
They do. I have to say that for the most part, given the time period, the effects were pretty good. I'd have to say where reality left my brain was when they got in the rocket ship and went to Mars. I was kind of enjoying the movie to a certain degree until they went to Mars. And then I felt like I was having a nervous breakdown with the story. I started to become very anxious with it. It was so weird.
It kind of just comes out of nowhere. It's like, oh, we're going to Mars now.
And it turns out like everybody, well, not only does everybody have a twin, but they're an evil twin, and they all do the same exact thing on their part of the planet. So there's a good queen, and her twin is literally the evil queen on the other part of the planet.
That's where my thought came into play, where they were just like, definitely the Mars thing was like, okay, sure, I guess, why not? There's so much in this movie, why not go to Mars? I'm just still surprised that was even a thing that crossed their mind, because it wasn't on my list of expectations from the movie to like pop them. Hey, we're gonna resurrect this guy who's been dead for 50 years. Okay, I guess that's weird, and then we're gonna go to Mars. I don't know what they were thinking about back then. Clearly, the one thing they wanted the most though was booze. And this movie came out during Prohibition. And they were like, we're going to drink. We're going to, like, every scene, we're going to have a cocktail. It seemed like they were always trying to have a drink. I thought that was a funny, weird idiosyncrasy that you wouldn't find in most movies today, but they were definitely into, like, pro-booze communication. The future's going to have booze. It's going to be everywhere. Even on Mars.
Although they do mention that Prohibition is still a thing in 1980.
I know. That was funny that it was one set in 1980 and that two, Prohibition was still in effect. And obviously, I didn't know this until I researched it and saw the movie. This was a pre-code movie. And there's another little obsession the movie seems to have along with the drinking. There is a lot of women getting scantily clad throughout the entire film. Like, there is always a reason for a lady to be in her slip. Like, right to when they get to Mars even. And you have this weird, very strange set of dance numbers. The first group turns all 2001 on you with these monkeys. And then when you go over to the evil queen side, you have all these like very scantily clad women worshiping what I can only describe as a pagan god. I don't know what else to call it. It was actually called that in one of the descriptions I read, so it's all I got.
With large animatronic arms.
Yeah, it was very strange, and I have to say but once I went to Mars, that's when it kind of lost me. I found myself enjoying the first part of that movie more than I expected. I got a kick out of the premise. It was in the future. Marriage is like convened by a council. They choose who you marry, and it's based on status, and so that's what separates our young lovers. You know, they can't get married because she's supposed to marry someone else, and I was like, this is ridiculous, but I found myself enjoying it. Even the guy they brought back from the dead from the 1930s, it's out of nowhere, and I think my favorite aspect is they bring him back to life, and he's like, well, what am I supposed to do now? That's your problem. It was like, it's like, I can always make you dead again. No, I'm good. He just leaves. That's it. And then he ends up joining our protagonists through the rest of the movie. I'll put a slight recommend that people should see this. Just understand you are not going to be watching a normal movie. It's a bit too long too. It was like an hour and 49 minutes, I think.
Pretty long for the time as well.
A little too long and a little too weird, but it's interesting. I can't say it's not interesting. Darren, your last thoughts on this one?
You can watch it. You may decide that you don't need to watch all of it, but I'd recommend checking it out just to see the critical parts of it. It definitely did some neat things. And again, realize at the time that it's more play-like. So you're going to see large environments set up, and events are going to happen inside of it, and then we're going to move to someplace else. It's not something that is typical for today. Now, that said, it would be hilarious to see a movie like that being made today with someone like that's cynical and hilarious, like a Mike Judge doing a remake of what it would be like from today, and then go whatever it is, 50 or some odd years into the future and pretend like that's the thing. But someone did that already, kind of. So anyway, yeah, Mike Judge did. But the reality is, I think that the fun part about it is that it's got some imperfections about their predictions, but some of that's a lot of fun, especially considering that they got to the point where a lot of the movies we're going to talk about happened. They did screw up the outfits and costumes and like clothing that people would wear. They definitely, they got that wrong, but that's no surprise.
Emmett, do you have any final thoughts on Just Imagine?
It is also notable for being the first sci-fi film in sound. So that's another milestone it has, which is also kind of why I think it has musical numbers, because most of those early sound films were musicals, so I guess they felt obligated.
That makes sense. I mean, and there's not a lot to talk about the special effects, unfortunately. I could find next to nothing, but it's clear that it used many of the same techniques that were used on Metropolis. There's very similar kinds of, rear screen projection, miniatures.
The Schuften process.
The Schuften.
Yes, the Schuften process.
Wie beluften are Schuften.
For anyone that doesn't know, it's kind of like a mirror technique from back in the day, which was like a way to superimpose people in camera.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, and I did not know that was that process. Cool. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's move on then. I want to cheat here. I want to bring up one of my favorite movies, and I really wanted to talk about this one because I think it sets the stage for the 1980s perfectly. And for once, it's not Star Wars, although I'm sure it's going to come into play at some point.
Never seen that one.
And that's Dragon. What's that?
Oh, I've never seen that one.
Oh, yeah, it's a little film. It's a little tiny B movie. But the film is Dragonslayer. I can't tell you how much I love this film. When I was 10 years old when I saw it. It blew my mind. That movie is so dark for what it's supposed to be, but the effects, I think, still hold up. I think when you look at that dragon, was it Vermithrax pejorative? I love the name. I think it's like, what did they say? The worm of thrice? Is there something like that? It might be not thrice. Maybe it's... Anyway, I can't remember the exact meaning. But how does this one stack up on your meter, Emmett?
Oh, it is some of Phil Tippett's finest work. And that's saying something with his, like Star Wars. And
now, was this the first that genuinely, used Go Motion in the way it did? I know Go Motion was used before. I know that. But the way they used it, because I remember they couldn't do certain effects, because I guess, well, tell you what, let's start here. What is Go Motion? Describe it for our audience.
Go Motion is a stop motion process where you use a computer control that syncs with the camera shutter, so that on each frame you take, you can get a little bit of motion blur, which gives your stop motion puppet more realistic movement.
Yeah, because now I don't know if they used a computer before. On the making of I was watching, they were talking about they wanted the dragon to move a certain way, which would have required 8 or more puppeteers. And they said there was just no way, I think it was Dennis Murin was talking about it, that there was no way to synchronize 8 puppeteers. So they decided to try it on a track, hooking it up to an Apple II computer to keep track of what was going on and when. So was this the first time something this elaborate had been tried? At least that's what I was getting the impression.
Yeah, definitely this elaborate. It was like a simpler version was used on the Tauntauns in Empire Strikes Back, but they expanded it quite a bit in the time between Empire and Dragonslayer.
Yeah, because the AT-ATs, I think, used it too, and theirs are much more simply one step forward, one step forward.
Right. Whereas
this, they wanted the dragon to have a performance. He moved a certain way, felt a certain way. They wanted that vibe they kept saying it was a character throughout the entire making of, right down to in certain shots, they realized you couldn't see the eyes in the darkness of the cave with the miniature, and they said, hey, what if we put ball bearings in the eyes just so there's a gleam in the distance? And I thought that was so cool, the tiniest detail, because those little details are what stand out.
Yeah, it's ingeniously constructed.
So the things I didn't know, I know now. I know, but the puppet itself actually is controlled by the computer, in sync to. So there's a computer. Put that in quotes for 1981 or 80 or whatever, right? Computer.
Apple II.
Yeah, Apple II. So the puppet itself was controlled and then moved in sync with the shutter, so that the puppet was moving while the frame was taking, and you could repeat the step. And it wasn't actually manually manipulated like a traditional stop motion at all. It was all the ones that used this technology had to be literally pre-planned, and the puppet, it seems like, had to be built literally for the particular shot in mind, which is kind of crazy considering that. So they were building very bespoke things for very specific shots they had in mind. So that it took, who knows how much time it took for prep and planning and organization. That's kind of mind-blowing, frankly. But if it works like that, in theory, even though I don't know this to be true, you could recreate that and program it to do it over and over and over again. I guess film gets expensive, but it's still, what they were able to accomplish with the movie visually is mind-blowing. It's still amazing today. Obviously, the marriage of that technology with, the practical giant dragon, etc., head and claws and limbs and parts that were in the story helped sell everything. Not to go into a different movie, but obviously you could see why someone like a Steven Spielberg was looking at this when talking about Jurassic Park, because literally in a lot of ways this is very similar to what could have happened for that film, and this was done almost 15 years earlier, which is crazy to think about how well it was done. So
it is.
Yeah.
I was noting again, this is that layering thing that they used go motion for some shots. They used just Phil Tippett doing, standard stop motion. They built a giant size, we'll call it actual size, head and claw and tail. And one of the things I got a kick out of was they couldn't get the tail to work right. They just couldn't. It was just too big. It was just too unwieldy. And so on the day they were trying to film, he said, what if we just pick the dang thing up and drop it on that cart over there and have it smash the cart? And that's in the film. And so when you see it hitting things and impacting, it's because they couldn't get it to do anything else. So they did all that they could. And it just goes to show these were very smart people. And they used, what was that expression about using all of the cow or something? That's what they did here. They used every technique. There were shots of the head that were just a hand puppet, but it was an amazing looking hand puppet.
Yeah, gotta use the whole cow, even the head cheese.
Even the head cheese.
Head cheese is disgusting. Don't bring that up.
But you have to use it. Have you ever smelled foam latex out of an oven? It smells like it's like pure sulfur. It's disgusting.
It's funny you should say that, because when I was watching this, there were times when they were in the effects artists, studio, and I remember thinking, I know what that smells like. It's not pleasant. It is not a pleasant. You got to get used to it. It's very chemical based.
Yep, some effects shops would have like bathtubs just dedicated to washing the smell out of foam latex pieces.
What about matte paintings? This has a lot of beautiful matte paintings again. That's something that popped up in all the films I was researching for this episode. And my gosh, just some beautiful ones.
Yeah, Mysterious Island has Dragonslayer does, Just Imagine does, even Robocop.
Anything that stands out in this movie to you? It doesn't have to. Here, I'll give you one for me. The flying. That was apparently one of their hardest. I mean, it was all hard. Everything was hard. But they were talking about how to make this thing fly to give it a sense of life. In fact, I thought it was funny that they thought it wasn't as original as they had hoped. They said it felt repetitious. And I was like, man, I remember being 10 years old watching that movie in the theater. And that thing soaring through the sky scared the crap out of me. So they did fine.
Yeah, it's easier to be critical of yourself when you're looking at it under a microscope like that.
Darren, any final thoughts on Dragonslayer?
Yeah, to be fair, I mean, I've recently rewatched Dragonslayer and got to watch it in full 4K and a large projection and stuff like that. And I can tell you that all the visual effects, all the practical elements that were put in there, the go motion, the stop motion, the physical effects, all the stunt work, all the gore. There's definitely some gore in the movie, which is is very disturbing gore, I would argue, for its PG rating, if I recall correctly, or whatever it was.
Yeah, it's PG and has gore and even has nudity.
And it's a Disney.
Has it all. Yeah, it's it's Disney. I don't know if there's anything much to say besides the fact that the movie just still works today. I don't think it would work as well if they hadn't shot it as well. The clear elements of the director, obviously, and the DP, they put a lot of work into making sure things were good looking and clean. And that was hard to do back then, I would argue, especially considering all the visual effect elements, right? Because you're dealing with multiple processes and layering and things have to happen all in chemical form, right? All in taking photos and things like that and repeat and rinse and repeat. And I think they did a good job keeping that consistent. So if you're looking for probably one of the better put together films, especially if you're a fan of later things where they started to integrate, I would say, CGI with practical effects in the early 90s. This is really the beginning of that being a possibility. I think this movie started all that, and I would say it's a definite must-go watch. Like, if you haven't seen it, you have to watch it.
I'll second that. If you've never seen Dragonslayer, make sure you see it. Really good. Emmett, final thoughts?
I concur with what you're saying, and it just proves that Apple II was their best computer.
All right, well then why don't we move forward to a couple of films I think most people love and adore. The first one, definitely a huge hit, still talked about today, Robocop. And of course, more specifically, you wanted to discuss Robocop 2. Why Robocop 2?
Well, for one, it had a bigger budget and therefore kind of just expanded the effects that were used in the first one. Another thing I think is notable is that the whole end sequence at the OCP presentation was directed by Phil Tippett because, what's his name? The guy who directed
Irvin Kershner.
Yeah, Irvin Kershner. He was like, yeah, I don't really know how to handle all this, so I'm going to let the directing of this go to you, Phil.
Well, I'm not personally as big a fan of 2 as I am of 1, but that end sequence is amazing. It's just, I again saw it in the theater, and I remember literally sitting there as Robocop was fighting him, and it's a Phil Tippett wet dream on the screen because they're doing everything. They're climbing, they're going through walls, they're battling in the street. They do everything. And it's wild that this was in a major motion picture like that, because it made Robocop seem downright quaint with the Ed 209 sequences.
Right.
Darren?
Yeah, so to me, the Robocop 2 definitely stands out as a way more action-packed movie that's more focused on driving visual conflict more often than not. The ending conflict, fight, etc. I think the reveal of Robocop 2, Kane, Robocop, whatever, right, is an epic sequence of like brilliant processing of like in the dark, unveil, do it all correct, make it scary. I think they did a great job with the overall design too, to be said, because they definitely finally they made something that was in very much contrast to Robocop, and it wasn't what we expected, right? I mean, in the earlier sequences when they're trying to produce what would be Robocop 2 from a perspective of like the Robocop itself in the movie, right? That was scary and dark, and some of the most memorable stop motion, go motion, whatever you want to call it, whatever they use there, sequences in a movie ever. I think that it's an important part to remember that this was at a hallmark point where they could start doing more things. They had more money, clearly, right? However, some things were weirdly, and I think just to bring up the original, seemed cheaper. Like the design for Robocop, details in the head, the effects work on him were a little bit less good from a practical makeup perspective, which is very definitively, I think, there, which is odd to me. Some of the color tonality changes were there. Maybe that's intentional, maybe it's not. I don't know. But I do think that in general, the overarching story is much darker, grimmer, grittier in some ways, just because it seems more in disregard for life, and it's more about the control of a corporation, even more so to keep pushing that. But the visual effects, I think they just hold up. I can watch Robocop 2 as much as I can watch Robocop 1. I obviously prefer 1, but 2, I don't feel like if I'm going to watch 1, I can watch 2. You know, to me, they're both very fun. So
yeah, its biggest problem is that it just doesn't have as quite a tight a script as the first movie does. Like it's a little unfocused in some areas story wise.
I agree with that.
It gets very unfocused actually.
Well, one thing that stood out to me again, watching all these things, watching these movies, the making ofs, and I guess we can transition over because, I mean, look, Robocop is beloved, and I think most people know about that one. I don't think we can get too much into that one as far as new stories about effects. I believe even didn't Netflix do like a multi-part Robocop documentary recently, even?
That was Amazon Prime, actually, I believe.
Oh,
Who did it.
Amazon.
Yeah,
Okay.
That was the
So
RoboDoc, I think it was
yeah.
called.
RoboDoc, yeah. Yeah.
it's great that how much is known now, and all these films utilize multiple styles, and I'm kind of emphasizing that for a reason, because I watched a documentary on the movie Dragonheart, and for those that don't remember, this is the film with Sean Connery, Dennis Quaid, and I forget the year, but it was the 90s. I just can't remember the specific year.
95, I think.
Sure. It's interesting to me. This is post Jurassic Park at this point, and Dragonheart is very similar to Dragonslayer in many ways. I didn't even realize it till I was watching it again, and I went, wow, there's this whole correlation. There's a connection between the dragon and the kid who gets half of his heart for obvious reasons. But if you remember Dragonslayer, there's a connection between the dragon and the sorcerer, and the death of the sorcerer is the death of the dragon, and in Dragonheart, the death of the kid is the young man is the death of the dragon. But what got me was how just watching the making of, and I don't dislike Dragonheart, I think it's a fun movie, but how it was not very interesting. It wasn't as good of a making of. I was watching these documentaries on Dragonslayer and on Robocop, and there's all these wild stories, and we didn't know how to do this, so we tried that, and we did this because this wasn't working, and da-da. And then you get to Dragonheart, and there are some stories, but it's all just, and we built it in the computer. And it's interesting to me how it doesn't look as good, and it wasn't as interesting in its creation. Now, there's a lot of work going into it. I don't want to misrepresent. They had to burn villages down, and they built a full size mouth for when Dennis Quaid's inside the mouth of Draco. So it's not that they didn't do work and that there wasn't interesting things, but I thought it was prophetic that we were now going into the era that people like Phil Tippett and many of these ILM practical filmmakers were about to go out of work, that they wouldn't be coming back, that they wouldn't be asked to come back. Phil Tippett was becoming more and more just the guy you went to ask questions. He was a supervisor.
Right.
As opposed to the guy doing the actual effects. So what are your thoughts on that now we are transitioning out of a time period? Jurassic Park is hit, and Jurassic Park used everything. Again, it used every piece. Now we're going into an era when it's almost all done in a computer.
Well, I can quote Phil Tippett on one certain thing when he just said, I don't know, I'm kind of a dumbass when it comes to the computer, but one thing I did find to be true is that it's a lot easier to train an artist how to use his computer tools than it is to train a computer technician how to make art.
Darren, you're really into technology. I know that Jurassic Park is just one of your all-time favorites. What are your thoughts on the technology that created Jurassic Park versus the technology that was used in Dragonheart? Because there was a comment made that in Jurassic Park, there's like 6 minutes of CGI used. And in Dragonheart, it was 20-something. I can't remember the number off the top of my head. But they were obviously gearing more and more towards CG. There was more CG in it. What are your thoughts on this?
So I think that it's more apparent when you go from Dragonheart to today, almost. So when you look at the overall quality of the CGI, clearly they were being overworked. However, the one thing that stands out to me as being good consistently, even when CGI is often bad or not considered as good as Jurassic Park in the early days, is mentioning of Phil Tippett. I really appreciate the quality of the animation, and if anything makes a big difference, frankly, is it's the motion and feel of the character that's being put on screen. And I really think that saves Dragonheart a lot, because without the performance from the animators to move the dragon, which clearly they did not do anything that was cheapening that aspect, right? They had time to animate it correctly, rather than to render it and do all the other fine-tuning artistic elements to get it to look like it should belong in the scene. Whole different conversation, but the performance of the actual animators in combination with Sean Connery, clearly, they got the mouth stuff pretty good. I mean, the performances, the facial expressions, and the things which were critical to convey the emotion or the feel, even if the dragon looked a little out of place a little bit visually. The performances were so good from all the people that were making the dragon perform and from Sean. You literally had a situation where you can have your suspension of disbelief. I think that worked fine. They were overworked from a visual make it work, and they put this dragon sometimes in broad daylight. Come on. Like, we know that's a bad idea based upon what we saw earlier. You hide your visual effects in darkness, and you can make things look a lot better. They were gutsy enough to put it in broad daylight. I mean, it's difficult. It's challenging for most of the movie being in broad daylight. I know they did it definitely in Jurassic Park, but those seconds like for example, the T-Rex or the Gallimimus were on screen were very fleeting and very brief. Like, we're talking like seconds, like you're saying, right? Not minutes and going on and having a conversation. No one was talking to the T-Rex. So I think we're in a position where the movie survived and was, in my opinion, worked because the performance was so good. And if the thing looks and moves right, you kind of start to forgive the other idiosyncrasies. I mean, I still feel like Dragonheart's CGI looks better than some of the stuff we're seeing today, just because the actual motion and performance is better, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, certain things are going to improve naturally. So, Emmett?
That's a lot to take in. But, yeah, kind
Just your cursory thoughts.
Yeah, it is interesting that, yeah, a lot of what depends on what makes a good effect is kind of the world that's built around it. Like, does this visual effect, complement the story, or is it just frosting on a cake? I have not seen a Dragonheart in quite some time, I'll admit.
No, that's fine. That's fine. And again, I'm not actually attacking Dragonheart. It's a fine movie. It's a fine adventure. But I was just curious, are we losing something? And for me, the answer is yes, by abandoning all these techniques just to go to the computer. I mean, what's being lost? I understand they say it's cheaper, but I see the budget's just going up. So are we losing something, and what are we losing by not doing this?
I kind of think what we're losing is having like an artist's vision built into the story we're getting told. Because if you're using multiple techniques, that means you have to communicate with have a bunch of different departments communicating with each other to make sure like everything is looks good when it's all layered together. We're talking makeup, visual effects, physical effects. All that has to work in tandem. And when you're just going to, it's all built in the computer, then kind of all we're getting is just sort of well, if we want to change something to look different later, we can. And that just doesn't really build a very interesting world if you can just swap out whatever.
I like what you said about having all the different artists because, you again, going back to Dragonheart, a lot of the, not Dragonheart, I'm sorry, Dragonslayer, there were a lot of creators offering their own points of view. We should do this. We should do that. This should look like this. That should look like that. So you're getting more than one singular vision. And so I think that's another reason you get a lot of flavor. There's a lot of seasoning in that soup, whereas now you just have one predominant flavor.
Exactly.
And I think that's what I'm going to miss.
Let me add to that statement on that opinion. So the reality is too, now there's more time and flexibility. Back then, even for Dragonheart, they didn't have all the time in the world to like render out these shots. Like, they had to get it right, and it's true for practical effects too, and it was true for visual effects for a while, where you had to get it right, and you only had like one take. Maybe you'd get lucky and have two takes. And with even CGI in the mid 90s, you might have one render, maybe you'd get a second render, right? You might get two chances, but like you didn't have this unlimited resource like it feels like CGI technology has today, which is ruining the art form, I feel like.
Now it more just feels like, when you don't have to wait for render times, like Darren was saying, that be it a producer or even a director can just be like, nah, I don't like that look, just change it. Give them extra feathers.
Well, I like the blending that's starting to happen where you see them using practical models again, but they are capturing them in the computer and then they bring them into the film. I know on Force Awakens, they try to bring as much practical back in, and I think it's one of the better looking of the new trilogy for that very reason. I like that they had actual on-set creations, and I feel like we're returning to that a bit more. And then even when they're not there on set, again, they're busy building physical models and then scanning them into the computer, and that way they can shoot it from whatever direction they want. Whereas, it would have been like a motion control system back in the days of Star Wars. And for people that don't know, what they would do is they would put like an X-wing on this rail system run by a computer, and they would say, put the engines on, the lights that were the engines, and it would pass in front of pass in front of the camera, not the computer. And then they would stop the camera, put it back to 1, and it would perfectly match that again every time they ran it. Now they'd have the stars in the background lit. Now they'd have the cockpit lit, and they could do this over and over for multiple exposures to have an even lighting. And it's like, I could kind of understand why you don't want to do that now. It takes a very long time to do that, especially when you can build the space they're flying in with the planet in the background, the X-wing in the foreground, the pilot in the cockpit, and you can put it all in the computer. I get why you wouldn't want to do that. It's just I'm missing that personality that films used to have. But it does feel like we're starting to reincorporate the old ways in with the new ways, and I personally am a fan of that.
We just had that actually recently with the Star Trek The Next Generation remaster they did for the Blu-ray release, where they took the original elements, filmed elements like you just was talking about, and they used modern compositing techniques to clean it up and fix it, but they took the original filmed elements, and I think that that's maybe the most brilliant thing you can do, is take the original practical things that were shot and filmed on camera with like the highlights and the stars and, the lights being on, lights being off, and occlusion and all the parts that they used to film independently and had to bring them together. They have all that material, but if you use modern compositing techniques, taking those original plates and combining them today, I mean, for those that have seen it, I believe, Fred, you probably have, and et cetera, that is amazing. So I still think that there's a lot that can be done. I wish that would be possible for some other movie that has star in its name. It would be cool to see that and modernize the compositing techniques, because frankly, you can fix a little details here and there with a little bit of visual effects, but the practical effects combined with modern technology to combine it all, that's a chef's kiss. That's just amazing. And the Star Trek stuff looks brilliant because of that. So
don't disagree. So why don't we start bringing this home? Emmett, anything we haven't discussed you'd love to bring up on the world of effects in film?
It's like my first love of film was from studying this old artistry, and yeah, I do find it hard to sell it to people my own age, and even some people who are a little older than I am.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it can also be kind of hard to explain why I don't find some more modern stuff quite as interesting.
I can sympathize with that. I find it difficult. I mean, it's hard to talk about special effects in general because it's the films that we love. We don't talk about the effects. We talk about Dragonslayer. We don't talk about the effects. We talk about Robocop. We don't talk about the effects. We talk about Jurassic Park, generally speaking. It's these films that these characters came alive, and we think of Robocop as a genuine character, as a person. He's real to us, and his world is real to us because of effects. And so in many ways, it's that dirty little secret. You're not supposed to talk about it. Don't notice the man behind the curtain. So it can be a kind of difficult topic to talk about.
Right. Like, I used to work with somebody who would explain to me why the remake of Robocop is a superior film to the original. Because it's easier to him, it was easier to take seriously, whereas
I have heard this.
Yeah. I did not really know. It was a reason we didn't talk much, I'll say.
All right, gentlemen, final thoughts across the board. I've already said my piece about effects and movies. Darren?
Lights, camera, action. I want to say that visual effects are always going to be something that people are going to enjoy and flock to see. The catch is that we've seen in the past, and it's been exciting and brought people into theaters. Sometimes more so or less so, depending on the situation. Obviously, the Dragonslayer wasn't as successful as it could have been. There's other films we could talk about, practical effects, that also had hits here and there. But there's also been some huge successes as a result of doing that, especially when you combine the elements together just correctly. There's always going to be a new effect. I hope that there's opportunity to bring back the old and continue to combine it with the new, so we can see some things that just confuse people to where they just don't know how that worked. I want those days back. So let's go visual effects artists. Let's bring that mystery and back to the filmmaking process. So
Excellent. Emmett, final thoughts, and where can they find your movies at?
Okay, well, I'll start with final thoughts. When you want to sell somebody on an old effect, make sure it's just as dark as Dragonslayer. Give them some radical treatment, I'll say. And if you like this stuff, study your history. You can learn some interesting ways things can be combined.
Agreed.
I can be found on YouTube by HOBO Films LLC. Should pop up there. You'll see a little cardboard cutout looking at you. Got a couple projects in the works right now. Updates as they come.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, this actually flew by, so I guess we'll just end here and say to everyone listening, as Emmett already stated, go out there and watch these making ofs. They're for free on YouTube. I gotta tell you, I fell down a rabbit hole rewatching these on YouTube, and I didn't want to stop. I was having a blast watching them. All the ones I've mentioned are on YouTube, and if you got some DVDs and Blu-rays at home in your collection, I'll bet you there's some making ofs on those. Check it out. Give a little love to the magicians that make all of this happen and bring our favorite characters and stories to life. So with that, I'm going to say I hope you all have a blessed week. Darren, Emmett, and I hope you have a wonderful night, both of you.
Thank you.
Peace and love.
Good night, everyone.